Joining me in studio, a little bit early, but I'm glad to see him, Representative Elliott Engen, who's also going to be running or is running for State Auditor. Good morning, Elliott. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. How about yourself? It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for coming in this morning. Certainly want to get into your decision to run for auditor. You have any thoughts on Kristi Noem coming to town and the appearance at Fort Snelling? I think it caught a lot of individuals a bit off guard. I think we didn't realize she was going to be coming to town. There was no major announcement made beyond pointing out what a lot of us already know relating to the sanctuary policies that have been, used by Governor Tim Walz. But what are your thoughts about her appearance here?
I think it's a great thing. I mean, anytime you can highlight just how, the lunacy of the DFL under Tim Walz, that's always a good thing. And, a lot of people will say on the Democrat side, we're not actually a sanctuary state. We've never actually passed a law saying that we're a sanctuary state, but we're going to give you free college tuition. We're going to give you free health care. We're going to give you driver's licenses. We're going to give you universal basic income pilot program accessibility, and everything else under the sun. And, the rest of us who are living paycheck to paycheck, 68% of Minnesotans, it's us in the working class that's footing the bill.
Well, and I mentioned this earlier when I started the discussion about her visit, but this is all a positive sign because the more attention brought on these issues, despite the controversies that surround them because of protesters that show up or the way it's covered in local media, the more opportunity that we have for just individuals to use their platform to speak the truth, the more opportunity that we have to actually get change here in Minnesota. You can push back on the negativity surrounding it, but when you compare the way the left is speaking about the issues and the way the right is speaking about the issues, every opportunity that people have to see the truth being spoken, regardless of what their political position is a positive step in the right direction.
Well, and so many people actually think that you're wearing a tinfoil hat and you're being a conspiracy theorist when you simply say what it is that the DFL is doing on an everyday basis. I mean, you're saying the flat out truth, the policies that they not only support publicly, the ones that they support in the media, the ones that they pass into law, but then when you tell a voter, hey, this is actually going on here in the state, they can't believe it. And so anytime we can educate folks, that's how we're going to end up winning in 2026.
Good morning, John. Yeah, that drives me crazy when people who call them Christians and pastors talk about we got to take care of these illegal aliens when Jesus himself said you have to obey the laws of the land. Well, they're here illegally. So how do they? I just don't understand. It drives me nuts. Have a great day.
It's been a while since I've done this commentary, but it seems appropriate, dovetailing off of Jim's talkback from the iHeartRadio app. When it comes to compassion takes a lot of different forms. And the way that the left is handling those here in the country illegally is not compassionate. When you're enabling individuals to go and break the law, when you're not holding people accountable for their actions, there's nothing compassionate about that. The most compassionate thing that we can do as a nation is to hold people accountable. The most compassionate thing that we can do is what President Donald Trump is doing regarding illegal immigration, stopping the flow of individuals coming into the country, taking away the incentive that people have to come into the country here illegally, shoring up security on our border to make it harder for people to make those bad decisions. That's real and true compassion. And I'd like to say that I wish Republicans would talk about this more. They do. They often don't get the coverage that the left gets on this, but we need to take that back. We need to take that idea of compassion back and really articulate what true, real compassion means.
You just hit the nail on the head. I mean, 42% of women who cross the border illegally are going to end up being raped. We don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about the fact that 375,000 unaccompanied minors during the Biden administration, to this day, we don't know where they are. They could be being trafficked. They could be anywhere. It's so sad that we don't talk about them. We don't view this through the lens of the victims in all this. And, the more we do that, I think the more the left is going to have a hard time refuting the fact that an open border policy is a heartless policy.
Yeah. Representative Elliott Engen has joined us in studio, running for state auditor. We're going to talk about that with him next. If you have any questions, we already have a few that have rolled into the iHeartRadio app. You can get those in on the iHeartRadio app. Leave us a talk back, and we'll talk about him launching the campaign for State Auditor. And I want to remind you, too, that if you have not updated the iHeartRadio app recently, be sure you go into your app store, make sure you have the latest update of the app. They're always adding new features to enhance your listening experience and enjoyment. And make sure you take advantage of the preset that's already available on the app and make Twin Cities News Talk your number one preset inside the iHeartRadio app. And we'll talk with Representative Elliott Engen next here on Twin Cities News Talk. Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130 and 103.5 FM from the 651 Carpet Next Day Install Studios. My name is John Justice. Sam is in the master control booth this morning, and we have two-term state legislator. I'm working off the Alpha News cheat sheet out of White Bear Township, launching his campaign for state auditor last week, Representative Elliott Engen. Thank you so much for coming in, Elliott. Good to see you.
Great to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Why are you doing this?
Oh, my gosh.
Where do we start,
ask
right?
myself that exact same question. But at the end of the day, I can't sit by idly anymore and watch, just as a cog in the machine, in the House of Representatives, trying to reform a broken institution from within. It doesn't want to change. It doesn't want to fix itself. It doesn't want to be accountable to the people, and it doesn't want to stop this rampant and never-ending fraud that we're going through. And so instead, you need to have a bully pulpit and an opportunity to actually stop and prevent it from outside of it. And that's what the state auditor's office affords. And, you know, at the end of the day, I don't have a CPA's degree. I don't have a PhD or a master's. But you know what I do have? Common sense. And right now, in that office, there's a lot of PhDs. There's a lot of masters. There's a lot of professional academics. And it's not working. It's not working with the amount of fraud we have. So we're going to go in there and we're going to turn over every single rock to make sure that tax dollars are not going towards the thieves that they're currently going towards.
Well, I do have a foe of the show who is very desperate to ask you these questions because they've left multiple talkbacks. Now, I'll just go
That's
with
awesome. Let's
the
go through
first
them all.
one that they left.
Let's do it.
Let's go here.
Hey, Morton, this is Eric from Brainerd. Question for Elliott Engen. Elliott, if elected state auditor, you'd be the youngest elected official in state history to run for the position. Wondering why anyone should vote for you when you have almost zero experience in what you preach and you have a lot of ideas, but you're making up things about the position that aren't even job responsibilities. So, yeah, just wondering why someone should vote for you that has almost zero experience in this field. Thanks.
For the record, he did add another one, and then he says that you have as much experience as Mom Donnie would have as mayor, also known as a zero.
Well, I've also worked a day in my life, but let's take it at face value.
Sure.
I'd be the youngest in state history. Yes, that's true. Does that mean that we don't know what we're doing in Gen Z and that we're not working our butts off trying to reform what is a broken institution in politics right now? That's 100% what we're doing. And look what we have right now. Like, do we want to stick with the status quo? Why would we continue to do that? So what we're going to do is go in there, and I know where the skeletons are buried after 2 terms in the House. I know how the fraud is baked into the cake of legislation and how all of these omnibus bills are really just means for opaque and non-transparent ways of giving out money and doling out money to your friend nonprofit groups who then end up bankrolling your elections. I know how this corruption works. I know how it's baked into the cake, and I know how to stop it. And when I pass bills after, working my butt off for 3.5 years trying to get something done to make sure that your tax dollars don't finance an election or make sure that your tax dollars are going to accountable nonprofits if they go to a nonprofit at all these guys said no. But they didn't say no in the light of the day. They said it behind closed doors so that they could tell you that they're doing the right thing, but in reality, they're doing just the opposite. And, at the end of the day, I've worked in a nonprofit. I know how a lot of those work. I know how those operate and how they can really muddy the waters to make it seem as if they're doing, something that's of benefit for the taxpayer, when in reality, it is nothing other than a Ponzi scheme.
What hasn't, in your mind, the auditor been doing, the current auditor? What would be like your biggest complaint right now relating to, all the issues of fraud that we've been talking about in the state? But what would be your biggest complaint about the current auditor serving?
We have nation-leading fraud, and Julie Blaha has been extremely MIA. You don't even know what she's doing half the time, unless she's rolling over a van with a White Claw associated with it.
Right.
And what I'm so sick of is hearing Democrats say, well, you don't even know what the office does. You don't know what the job duties are. Yes, I do. But I also know that job duties, you can go above and beyond them. And there's nowhere in Section 6.02 of the state constitution or of the state statute that lays out the constitutional authority of the Office of the Auditor that says that you can't also look into the forensic auditing of state agencies, that you can't also look into the contracted NGOs that those state agencies are working with, that you can't dive deeper and coordinate and partner with the BCA in their fraud prevention unit, with the federal investigators, with county attorneys, with sheriffs. We should be playing an active role in preventing fraud in a proactive manner, not just in a reactive manner. And it's not even reactive anymore. I mean, that would be a bare minimum if Julie Blaha and the Democrats have done that over the past 6 years. But the only time that they talked about fraud is right about now, because it's an electoral issue and it's something that the public knows far too much about. And so if nobody had said anything and this were all still under the table, we're all still hush-hush, they'd be doing absolutely nothing about it.
Expectations on if a Democrat were to go and retain this seat. Julie Blaha is not running for a third term. I know you've got Representative Dan Wogelmont. He's announced he's going to run. We have Fergus Falls Mayor Ben Shearer. He's announced he's going to run. But, you know, if a Democrat gets back into this position again, talking with Representative Elliott Engen, I mean, expectations on how they're going to handle it. And why do you think Julie Blaha isn't running again?
Well, I also wouldn't run for re-election if I'd overseen the state's largest fraud scheme in the nation. And also, if a Democrat were to retain this office, what you'd end up seeing is the pretend guise of actually solving the issue, but in reality, you wouldn't be doing anything. You just come out and talk about fraud a little bit, but only when it benefits your own side. And a state auditor should be completely 100% neutral and independent and call out fraud wherever they see it, whether it's on the Republican side or the Democrat side. And there's plenty on both to talk about. But, you know, over the past 6 years, while Democrats are overseeing the entire state government, they've been doing it for their own benefit. And, you know, Dan Wogelmont, he might be a nice guy, but at the end of the day, Democrats have been drunk at the wheel in overseeing fraud. Don't hand the keys over to Dan Wogelmont.
Talk a little bit about your decision to run for state auditor. How long have you been considering this? Was there a moment in time that sort of went, okay, now I know I need to do this?
Yeah, it's been quite a few months in the making, and a lot of prayers, a lot of discussions with my wife. Obviously, it throws a big wrench into the plans of what a summer looks like, what campaigning looks like, what life looks like. And so I wanted to make sure that I was doing this for the right reasons. And I really feel like I am, because having sat in the Minnesota House for the past 3.5 years, what I've watched is the appearance of a representative government, but really it isn't. It's the idea of one. It makes people think that they have a voice, that their representative is going up there and advocating on their behalf. But there's really only a handful of people that make the big decisions, and everybody else is just kind of that cog in a machine who has a button to press, but everything's already been kind of done for them. And I don't like that. I didn't go up to St. Paul to, you know, pretend to be a legislator, to live action role play the idea that I can make change. I really want to make change and institute good, integrity-driven policies. And I know now that that's not the institution to do it in. But in the state auditor's role, you can make sure that happens and really go to the bully pulpit and let the public know what's going on behind closed doors.
Representative Elliott Engen joins us in studio, running for state auditor. Let's go back to the iHeart Radio app, and then we'll hear from Judy.
Good morning, John and Elliott. Thank you, Elliott, for running for state auditor. And to Eric from Brainerd, you don't need to have any kind of a licensure or experience to go in and see where there's fraud. I worked a lot with programs in some of my career roles where we did auditing. You don't need to have any kind of special whatever. You can see when somebody's scamming money. It's pretty easy to go through and look. And so far, nobody's done anything about it. So what's your answer?
100%. You need common sense. You need two legs. You need to be able to walk up to a site that's getting $11.8 million and say, hey, it doesn't look like there's a single kid being served here.
Well, and you look at, we covered last week on Friday, the editorial that came out from Jim Nobles, just laying out how many individuals, excuse me, I'm dry mouth this morning, how many individuals within the legislature and within DHS were aware of what was going on, and they simply, looked the other way. I've heard anecdotally these this commentary, these suggestions, and then you see an individual like Jim Nobles step out and say, no, this is, this was actually happening, and lay it out. And as Representative Max Reimer relayed on Friday, Jim Nobles was a ball and strikes kind of guy. He would just call it as he sees it. I hope it's not too little too late, but it seems as if now the fraud conversation is taking center stage in the state, and you have even your most left-leaning in the tank Democrat outlets are, jockeying a bit to have their own documentaries about fraud.
Right.
These are all good things. I mean, the question is that actually reaching, voters? And I guess only time will tell. The result of the elections will let us know.
I really think it is. And, at the end of the day, this shouldn't be a Republican or a Democrat issue. And if you are a Democrat and you happen to be listening to this right now, and you really do want to take care of the most downtrodden amongst us, the least amongst us, who are really struggling and falling on hard times, and we have state programs, we're supposed to be able to help them out, have a little safety net, but not a hammock, as us conservatives like, then you'd want to vote for a Republican for state auditor to make sure that those dollars actually get to where they need to go. Because right now, they're going everywhere but.
Let's go here.
Hey, John, good morning. Great show. Barry in Andover. A question for the representative running for auditor. With all of the fraud that we've had in Minnesota, would that be something that would have been under the state auditor's purview? And if the answer is yes, were they just willfully blind to it? And if no, who should have been catching that? Thanks. Have a great day.
So this is a terrific question, because at the end of the day, everybody who's been in front of a microphone talking about the fraud issue within the Walz administration or the current DFL controlled government, they cast blame to somebody else. They always pass the buck and say, that's not our job. That's not our duty. And Julie Blaha, chief amongst them, saying that, it's our job to partner and work alongside municipal governments and local units of government to make sure that their books are audited correctly. But at the end of the day, they also are allowed to oversee federal contracts, just like Feeding Our Future. I mean, she had the purview to come out 3.5 years before it became a massive nation-leading story about fraud here in Minnesota and say, hey, something ain't right here. But she didn't. And, there's a multitude of ways that our office is going to expand the duties and really set the new bar for what it looks like to be a state auditor. And amongst them is a fraud prevention and recovery unit within the office to coordinate with those county attorneys, sheriffs, the BCA, federal investigators, and the legislature to get ahead of the fraud. That's going to be the proactive side. We're also going to have an expansion of data analytics and AI integration, because right now there are so many question marks that legislators like myself have as to where the money's going that we never get answers to. And it's not able to be found purposefully. If you can't get the answer, then you can't plug the holes where the boat's sinking, and it's everywhere. And then we're also going to be launching a statewide Mintegrity hotline so that Minnesotans can partner with us in being active thwarts to the fraud. I mean, we have so many instances of people reaching out, even since I've announced, probably hundreds of people saying, hey, this program is fraudulent. Here's my experience with it. There's no reason why we shouldn't have somebody who's dedicated to fielding those questions and those concerns, around the clock. And if you're somebody who's going to be reporting that, maybe you should actually be given a carrot approach. You should be incentivized or rewarded for having brought us a real instance of fraud that ends up gaining to a conviction. And then we're going to expand the office to also audit agencies and then those NGOs that they're contracting with, because we know that the nonprofits are a massive part of the issue.
Over the course of the past few years, I've had so many people reach out to me, and just to sort of dovetail off of what you were saying, Representative Elliott Engen, who've reached out to me and they've talked about what you mentioned, that, hey, I believe there's fraud here. And then they take it a step further and they'll say, and I actually went and brought it to people's attention that we're in positions of power to do something about it, and it never goes anywhere.
Never does.
Just falls on deaf ears.
Yep.
It's incredible. Let's go to this comment from the iHeartRadio app. A question for Representative Elliott Engen.
Good morning, John. Say, could you ask Mr. Engen whether he believes there's a Somali component to all the fraud, widespread fraud that's going on? And if so, why is that? Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Yeah, listen, this is one of those issues where we know within the Somali community what's been transpiring relating to the fraud. You can see it in the convictions that have taken place. There was another story by CBS just over the weekend of some voter fraud that was taking place, specifically from a group of Somalis. It's a controversial issue, but what are your thoughts on that component here in this community in Minnesota when dealing with these issues?
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I saw that there was actually a pause on a program that was supposed to help Somali independent small business owners and startup nonprofits through Minnesota Deed. And I thought about that for a second. I said, why in the heck would we have one only for the Somali community? Why wouldn't it be for other Minnesotans as well? Why would we limit that? And why have we turned such a blind eye to the fact that the Somali community, who's also, by the way, being the most ripped off by these instances of fraud, why aren't we going into those communities and talking about those fraud reporting hotline numbers that they could be calling, or if they see something to say something? We don't do enough of that as is, but there also is a problem with the Somali community engaging in fraud as well. And we need to be honest about that. We need to find ways to prevent that, and prosecution must come. And right now with Keith Ellison, we shouldn't hold our breath that it will be.
All right, let's go. More questions rolling in for you here this morning. Let's go here.
Hey, good morning, Elliott, and thank you for running. I remember Tim Pawlenty tried to audit the Minnesota Department of Education, and that audit got shot down by the Minnesota Supreme Court. Do you have any plans on doing that?
And I want to mention, too, I've had several people that have actually asked that same question as well. So
100%. And at the end of the day, in 6.02 of our state statutes, which outline the constitutional offices and the authorities of the state auditor, it doesn't say anything about how we aren't allowed to ask and really dive into the forensic auditing in books of anything that ends up trickling down to the state level. So if the Department of Education receives appropriations and those end up going towards an ISD, an independent school district, well, that's at the local level. Now we can start working our way up and really dive into the books. And what we'll find is going to be glaring, because right now we have reports of $2 billion or $1 billion. Those are kind of the numbers that get thrown around a lot for totality of fraud. I would estimate that it's closer to 8 to 10. That would be my guess off the top of my head. It's everywhere, and it trickles down to all levels.
What are your thoughts? I've made this comment on the show that I'm convinced, and I'm curious your perspective as a representative serving in the legislature and being a part of watching these debates take place. But if we had an administration under the governorship that identified immediately when they saw this dramatic increase in dollars being requested coming from these various entities that we know now have turned out to be fraudulent, I'm convinced that if we identified that up front, that we would end up seeing that the majority of these programs that end up being fraudulent weren't necessary in the first place. Would you agree with that, or am I missing some nuance there? I'm curious your perspective.
That is true. I mean, with the amount of fraud that we've had in the past 6 years, you could eliminate an entire state agency or two. But also, it's so sad how they use compassion as a guise for their corruption. That's typically where the fraudsters will go to try to take advantage of a state program, whether it be housing stabilization services, people who can't get into a home, they're homeless. People are taking advantage of them. Whether it's substance abuse disorder treatments, those have been ripped off with Evergreen Recovery Inc. and a number of other programs. Whether it be autism centers. I mean, they always go after the people who actually do need help. And those dollars, what legislators will say is, look, those funds have dried up because there's such a high need. We must throw more towards it. And, you can't be the heartless legislator who doesn't vote for that. That's what they try to do. They try to paint that picture, but in reality, they know what they're doing. They're setting up their friends, their apparatus of NGO groups and friendly organizations who end up contributing to their campaigns and voting for them. They're setting them up with a niche industry that only they are allowed to engage in, while the rest of Minnesotans who are living paycheck to paycheck in the working class and families are the ones having to foot the bill for this.
Let's go back to the iHeartRadio app, brought to you by Lindahl Realty. We'll continue with our conversation with Representative Elliott Engen, running for state auditor.
I appreciate everything your guest is talking about and wanting to do to expose fraud in this state, but don't you have to have a state AG willing to prosecute, and I just don't see that with Ellison. How do you get past the fact, other than, say, maybe the federal DOJ, of prosecuting fraud once you find it, if you have a state AG who has no willingness to do so?
100% correct. Now, if you take a look back to the Feeding Our Future scandal in 2022 or thereabouts, when it was kind of an electoral issue leading up to the November election and the midterms, it wasn't until people started sounding the alarm on it that Keith Ellison cared at all. He didn't. He sat on his hands. He let the money keep flowing. And he even said in a closed-door meeting, which was recorded and leaked audio footage would confirm, that he's actually going to be fighting for the fraudsters. And so it wasn't until you had somebody that alerted the public, that made it an issue that voters knew and cared about, that he took action. And so if you have a watchdog who's also able to use the bully pulpit and go and alert the public of fraudulent programs, even when others won't, that's going to be a proactive thing for protecting our tax dollars. And secondly, after they won the trifecta after 2022, Keith Ellison made sure that in the Judiciary Omnibus Bill, there was a change to the law that requires him, it said, shall prosecute nonprofit instances of fraud. Well, now, if you look in our state statutes, it says may, as in he can pick and choose when he's going to be prosecuting that. And so they're just trying to hide behind multiple layers of corruption and unethical behavior that allows this to happen in perpetuity. But if you have somebody in there who's willing to, speak the truth wherever you find fraud and alert the public to it, they're going to demand action.
Let's go back into the iHeartRadio app. We have another question that's rolled in for Representative Elliott Engen.
Would you mind making a comment on your thoughts of Keith Ellison believing that Fleet Farm should have had a system in place to identify a straw buyer, but he's got, 6 federal government programs at least, and over $2 billion in fraud, and he can't see the forest through the trees.
It's more of a statement than it is a question, but Representative Elliott Engen, what are your thoughts on what he had to say?
Well, for listeners who don't know, straw purchasing is when you buy a gun and you're eligible to purchase a gun, but then you give it to somebody or sell it to somebody who isn't. And that's a crime in the state of Minnesota. And when Republicans tried to increase that criminal penalty, Democrats were the first to oppose it at every turn. And we also tried making it so that there weren't 83% of gun crimes that were either downward departed, pled away, and lenient sentences were given, or there was a prosecutor-initiated sentence reduction or a judicial sentence reduction. We're trying to make it so that people who actually engage in violent behavior are, held accountable and put behind bars. Democrats have opposed that at every turn, but what do they want to blame instead? Fleet Farm? It's just like when Keith Ellison blamed Kia and Hyundai for the carjacking epidemic. They always need to shirk blame because at the end of the day, they know that their policies don't work, but they need to try to convince you otherwise.
Representative Elliott Engen's going to hang out in studio with us for a bit. We'll continue to take your questions if you have any for him as he runs for state auditor. We're going to turn our attention, though, over to Governor Tim Walz, the town hall that he had over the weekend. Former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was there as well, and we're going to get sort of the backstory on what these town halls actually are. Elliott and I were talking about this off the air, and he has some really great insight relating to what Walz is actually doing with these town halls. So we'll talk more with Representative Elliott Engen. We'll get to more of your comments. Talkbacks from the iHeartRadio app coming up on Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130 and 103.5 FM. Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130 and 103.5 FM. Hour 3. Representative Elliott Engen joins me in studio. He's running for state auditor. How long have you been serving as a representative now? How many terms?
3.5 years, but holy crud, it feels like more.
What do you think, just real quick on, and we're talking about fraud a moment ago, is there any aspect of the conversation around fraud that we talk about so often that isn't getting covered or you think isn't being talked about enough? Is there an angle on this that you feel like, this is getting missed?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's that legislators are often benefiting from it, and that's why they're not preventing it. I remember my first term, my second session in the legislature, I came across information that Senator John Hoffman, who's been recently in the news for having been attacked and, somebody tried to kill him. And so we're praying for him, and we hope he's doing well, he and his wife, Yvette. But I did see an instance where he funneled $3.5 million via a bill that he chief authored and passed through the committee that he was the chair of, that gave that money to his own nonprofit that he was the executive director of. And so when you see that, you have to call it out. And if you don't call it out, you're just another cog in the machine. You're just another political status quo type figure who is not calling out the elites who are benefiting from their positions of power. And that's wrong. And when we see it on the Republican side, too, we need to call it out. And so I think that there's going to be something in the coming days that we're going to be talking about a lot, about a certain Republican that might be doing the exact same. And we're going to be an independent watchdog for the state of Minnesota. We're going to say something when we see it. And you guys should definitely stay tuned for more on that.
All right, let's turn our attention over to these town halls, doing nothing with my fingers, that Governor Tim Walz is conducting. He had one over the weekend.
Town halls.
I know. We'll start off with this, though. This is part of the reporting from Fox 9. Former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords pushes for action on gun laws in Minnesota. A packed auditorium in Waconia High School hosting this gun violence prevention town hall featuring a panel of notable figures discussing ways to prevent future tragedies. Here's a bit of the coverage from Fox 9.
Now is the time to come together. Be responsible. Democrats, Republicans, independents. We must never stop fighting. Fight, fight, fight.
Former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, a survivor of gun violence, was one of a panel of 5 at a gun violence prevention town hall. The DFL hosted it in Waconia to make its case to Minnesotans on getting something done. Governor Tim Walz made a suggestion.
And I will tell all of you, we'll put it on the ballot. You can vote for a constitutional amendment.
Also on the panel, the first physician on scene the day of the deadly shooting at Annunciation, Dr. Tim Coomer. He helped care for 12-year-old Lydia Kaiser.
The energy from the rifle was so great, it caused life-threatening bleeding, and surgeons had to remove part of her skull. From a handgun, that would likely have only been a graze.
DFL House and Senate leaders were also there. They encouraged their Republican colleagues to work together to pass gun violence prevention legislation.
Taking weapons of war off the street, banning large capacity magazines. You also heard the focus on mental health and school safety. We want a comprehensive approach.
Republican Speaker of the State House, Lisa Damith, tells Fox 9 in a statement in part, since the governor couldn't even get his own members on board with a special session on banning guns, it appears he's moved on to holding campaign rallies hosted by the DFL that aren't truly open to the public. This is exactly why the legislative process is important. We need to hear from all perspectives, not just the Walz-approved ones.
The DFL says its town halls are open to any resident. The next one is in Rochester on Thursday, November 6th. Leon Purvis, Fox 9.
Again, the reporting from Fox 9. So a couple of things, and then I'm going to hand it over to Representative Elliott Engen because I know he has just more than a few comments to share on this.
Hold me back, John.
So these are completely pre-screened campaign events. I know you're going to speak to that. You have agreeable attendees that are packing this first one, and they surely will the next one as well. No audio has come out of any of this event from over the weekend yet. I do have some audio to share of former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords and one of the individuals involved in her campaign. But Walz mentioned, when he mentioned these town halls and then said that he was going to be doing these in GOP districts, I was certainly scratching my head because if you really wanted to move forward on your gun control agenda, as Walz says he wants to do, he would be better off going to those Senate DFL districts where he doesn't have the votes on his own side to convince what would essentially be more so a friendly and receptive voting base to pressure his own side to go and get this done. But of course he doesn't. he goes into GOP-led districts because, in my view, he's trying to get what he wanted to get during a special session. He wants fodder to use not only for his reelection campaign, but also to use against Republicans. But the whole idea that these are town halls is nothing more than a smokescreen. And you actually provided me with a little bit of information I was completely unaware of regarding that aspect.
Yeah, these are fundraisers. They're not town halls. For Tim Walz to not only grave dance on the backs of the Annunciation tragedy and call these town halls to talk about serious gun control legislation that's going to prevent this from happening again, it's not only completely, I mean, it's a farce. It's a farce on the face of it, but it's also disgusting in that he's using this as a means to fundraise for his next election. And, you know, because he's calling it a town hall, he can actually use taxpayer dollars to put these on. And there is no audio, there is no footage of the Q&A session of that. Why? Because they weren't allowing people to even record it. This isn't a transparent and, you know, man of the people type governor that's going around talking about an issue that Minnesotans care about. He's literally doing this to springboard his next reelection effort and stay relevant for a national audience so that he can try to run for president and fail miserably again. And, you know, it wasn't but 24 to 48 hours after the Annunciation tragedy that he'd sent out an email fundraising blast alongside the Minnesota House DFL in the wake of the tragedy. And just think about that for a second. How do you sleep at night knowing that you're using a tragedy and an incident where kids were murdered and shot dead in cold blood to make money for your own political party? It's absolutely egregious. And what they won't tell you also is that there were 19 state and 4 federal gun laws that were broken in that same incident. They won't tell you that, you know, legislation that was previously deemed unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court in Columbia v. Heller, McDonald v. Chicago, and NYRSPA versus Bruin is what they're proposing. So these fixes, these legislative fixes to somehow put on paper the idea that an assault rifle, which they don't actually define, is now banned and illegal to possess. How in the heck is that going to take 435 million guns off the streets if they were to pass that in the hyperbolic sense of the word that they actually were able to be, you know, to get it done? It's absurd. And, you know, at the end of the day, they know what they're doing. This is about creating a new electoral issue because they have nothing to run on currently. Right. This is about trying to invoke emotion and pretend that they all of a sudden care about school safety, when in reality, for the past 3.5 years, since March, when I introduced the SHIELD Act, which actually would install cover, concealment, and communication within schools to prevent these tragedies from occurring, they've opposed it at every turn. And when I had a letter of support from both the NRA and Moms Demand Action for our bill, it was the Democrats who called up Moms Demand Action and said, hey, you better not be supporting a Republican bill, get off of it, and made them become neutral. They don't care about solving this issue. They care about it helping their poll numbers and their fundraising hauls. And there's nothing more egregious than that. That's the epitome of a disgusting politician.
So I want to get into with Representative Elliott Engen next. Walz floating this idea now of a constitutional amendment banning assault rifles. And if that were to move forward, what would that even look like? Plus, I have a stunning piece of audio. Emma Brown, she works with former Congresswoman Giffords, posted a clip on social media over the weekend after this event took place, and then stated a bunch of things that weren't happening, which makes me wonder if Congresswoman Giffords was even aware of what is transpiring relating to the very issue of which she was at this town hall, again, with my fingers over the weekend. So more of your comments from the iHeartRadio app, brought to you by Lindahl Realty. We have Representative Elliott Engen in studio joining me here on Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130 and 103.5 FM.
FM 103.5 and KTLK AM 1130, Minneapolis and St. Paul.
All right, I'm going to break my rule. Typically, I only break the rule for foes of the show, so I'm going to play another clip from a foe of the show just because it's too good to not go and address on Twin Cities News Talk from the 651 Carpet Next Day Install Studios. Representative Elliott Engen spending some extended time with us this morning as we talk about these alleged town halls by Governor Tim Walz. Let's go and hear again from Eric.
Hey, it's Eric again. Thank you, Elliott, for proving that you have no idea what you're talking about, you little zoomer. Waltz is not running for president. He's running for governor.
He's running for president, man.
He's running for
no,
president.
because governor is just...
And town halls aren't secretly not town halls because you don't like them. It was a town hall format. He was asked questions and answers, and Republicans were allowed to record, but no MAGA Republicans showed up. So that's on you, buddy. Have a good one.
So it sounds to me like we have a DFL operative who's spending their morning listening to John Justice in the morning. And that's a good thing. They're learning something, even if it hasn't quite set in yet. Eric, we appreciate you and that voice enhancer that you're using. Keep listening. You'll learn something someday.
Yeah, listen, these are, they're town halls in name only. If these were actual, legitimate, straight-up town halls, there wouldn't be this extensive pre-screening process.
I could have gone. You could have gone.
They wouldn't have been filled up with a bunch of activists. And I'm sure there were plenty of plenty of imposters posing as Republicans that would say, hey, I voted for Trump, and I'm absolutely in support of what it is you're trying to do. And Eric, we're speaking in somewhat generalities. The vast majority of the audience understands that. But if you have so few arguments to go and lend to the conversation that's where you want to go, then that would be on you. So, yeah, I appreciate you leaving a talk back.
Keep going, Eric. We can answer all of them.
All right, let's go here. I want to play this clip from Giffords and one of her officials within her campaign. But first, I want to address this idea of Walz is now floating the thought of a constitutional amendment banning assault rifles. So he says he's going to call a special session. Doesn't call a special session. Everybody knows they don't have the votes on their own side of the DFL, but now he's talking about going a different route and moving forward on a constitutional amendment. What's the likelihood that this would happen, and what would this even look like, Elliott?
So first off, when they had a full Democrat trifecta over the past 2 years, the previous 2 years before the 2024 election, they didn't pass this bill because they didn't have the votes, because they also know that it's unconstitutional. And now they don't have the votes, and they know it's unconstitutional. But they need an electoral issue, and they need people to try to turn out and vote for Democrats, even though they're offering absolutely zero. And, the party's approval rating, I think, is at 24%. So this is about nothing other than trying to create a new shiny object to attract voters to the polls when Democrats have done nothing to help them out. So
let's go here. Once I got in this morning, I was on X, and I found this clip. It is a Congresswoman, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, along with Emma Brown, who I believe works with her campaign. She says as much in the clip. Let me make one comment, and then I want to address it, because they seem to be completely confused over the reason why they were here in Minnesota in the first place. As I've said many times on the show, so I did 9 years of radio before coming here to Twin Cities News Talk in Tucson, Arizona. I'll never forget getting that phone call on that weekend morning before the news had hit that Congresswoman at the time, Gabby Giffords, had been shot. That Safeway grocery store, or the parking lot where she was holding this, it was a town hall. And it was an actual town hall. It was in public. Anybody could go and show up. I passed by that grocery store every single day on the way to work. I had said shortly after, as the former Congresswoman was recovering, she obviously had and is dealing with a lot of issues relating to that shooting in terms of her mental faculties. And I had always said that, listen, if she wants to, and she should, retire now from politics, which she did, and step out of the political limelight, hands off. She went through a horrific event. She survived a horrific event. And there doesn't need to be any added sort of criticism to her and what she represented at the time when she was serving in office. That didn't happen. And she immediately began to continue to do politics. I'm convinced that a lot of this was due to her husband, Mark Kelly. And I find it really unfortunate. She obviously has the wherewithal to be able to go up on stage and say some words, but she suffered from a horrific tragedy. And I can't help but feel, this is my own personal opinion on this, I can't help but feel that the individuals around her continue to go and use her because of what she's gone through. I find it incredibly unfortunate. So that's just my view on former Congresswoman Giffords. That being said, listen to this clip Again, this is Emma Brown along with Giffords, and Emma has to do all the talking for the former Congresswoman because she's just not capable of going and speaking in this way. But listen to what they have to say.
Hey everyone, it's Emma Brown here, Executive Director of Giffords, and I am here with Gabby Giffords. And we are in Minneapolis, Minnesota, actually specifically Waconia, Minnesota. We just did a big town hall here. There were 700 people RSVP'd, hundreds and hundreds of people in the room today to hear about this important package moving through the Minnesota legislature to do things like banning binary triggers, banning assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, closing the state's gun show loophole. This morning, Gabby and I met with the parents of the Annunciation church shooting, which was really hard. It was a hard, very sad meeting. But today we have seen tons of energy in this room in Minnesota to pass this package. We've got Governor Walz. He is with us. Now we just need Republicans in the state Senate and the state House to do it too. What do you think, Gabby? Let's get her done. Let's get her done.
So this should be breaking news splashed on all of our local news channels that apparently, unbeknownst to everybody, there is a package of gun reforms that's been created.
I think I'm missing work right now, John.
And it's moving through the legislature. This is completely brand new information, unless she's completely misguided.
We've been waiting on a special session since Tim Walz fired at the hip after Annunciation had tried making himself relevant on the national scene again to talk about the gun control issue rather than, take a deep breath and actually look at policies that would prevent this from happening and save our kids if, God forbid, somebody who, attempted to do them harm were to enter their school. But instead, we get this. We get the Giffords Foundation and their 40% of all donations that go to cozy salaries for Emma Brown and others, talking about bills that could never pass in a legislature that isn't in session with a governor that has zero wherewithal to actually pass something at all. We have a $341,608 salary last year for Emma Brown. It's pretty easy to look up. But, at the end of the day, this is what they exist to do. They're not actually looking to pass policies. They're looking to create a cozy job for somebody.
So here's the question that I have. Does she legitimately... This may not even be on her and Congresswoman Giffords. Like, does Emma Brown and did former Congresswoman Giffords come to Minnesota thinking and believing that there actually was a gun reform package that was actually moving through the legislature? Like, I legitimately believe that they think that's why they came here.
They don't think that deep. They don't think that there's a legislative package at all. They think that there's a public narrative that they need to try to create and craft and get people on board with so that when they try to pass something that is unconstitutional and they know it and doesn't even have the capability of passing into law and withstanding all of the court overturnings that would inevitably happen from it, they're just trying to use this as a means to fundraise and increase polling numbers.
So a friend of the show left a talk back in something that completely flew by both of us, and he points this out.
Hey, John, Chuck and Blaine. This one flew right by you guys. She made a comment that they did that presentation down there with 700 people, and then she said, now we need you Republicans to get on board with this also. So is she implying that it was only Democrats in the crowd?
Yeah.
I'm so curious.
It's ridiculous. That's a great point.
Yeah, no, it's
Chuck and Blaine, we appreciate it.
It's a fantastic point. And again, I'm wondering if they actually were up there thinking that they were advocating on behalf of a package that doesn't exist and that the legislature was really in session. Or did they just end up experiencing what we all experience, and that is anytime the governor, Tim Walz, speaks, he's lying.
Yeah, that. Crazy, man.
Yeah, you guys never were presented with anything over in the legislature regarding. I mean, that was one of the big problems with the special session is that you need to set forward the agenda, but you weren't even given a package to even examine before the special session would be called to even know, okay, this is what we're going to be looking at. They never even put any pen to paper, right?
Well, the only pen to paper that they put down was to write up a fundraising email in the wake of the tragedy. Talking about a special session without actually having a bill written down or drafted or even an idea thought up in their head. And then in that same fundraising email, they said that Republicans haven't been working on school safety issues or violence prevention issues at all. It couldn't be farther from the truth. If it wasn't for Mary Moriarty and woke DAs alongside the fact that 80% of our gun violence crimes are, downward departed, pled out. There's no repercussions at all for having committed them. We could fix this issue. We could fix this issue if we actually gave the tools to the students, the staff, and inside the schools to prevent and protect them from these sorts of issues. But Democrats would not go for it. They opposed it all at every turn, and now they want to talk about guns because they got nothing else to run on.
Representative Elliott Engen also running now for state auditor. Do you have any place online where people can go and find out about your efforts to become the state auditor?
Yeah, thanks, John. It's www.elliotengen.com. Last name's Engen. It's very Norwegian. We invite you guys to go there, and then we're going to be breaking some pretty cool news in the coming days. A 30 fraud sites in 30 days tour where we're going to be tracking across the state, showing not only previous instances of fraud and how they could have been prevented, but also we're going to be exposing some fraud as we go. So something that you guys definitely want to pay attention to, and we invite you guys to join this movement because at the end of the day, it's about making sure that the working class is put first instead of the political class and the special interests who they're working for.
Well, Representative, again, Elliott Engen, thank you so much for spending some additional time with us this morning.
Thanks for having me, man.
Greatly appreciate it.